again, and welcome to another thrilling and exciting Journeys with Jeff episode. Nice to have you here. I'm glad you guys tuned in. And we do have a repeat guest. Some of you might remember from some time ago, we had Gary Waite on, who's a biblical scholar. He was born and raised in Schenectady, New York. And he's with us again today to talk a little bit about what we talked about last time, about biblical studies and religious topics. But he also wants to share today his experiences as the archivist at the American School for the Deaf in West Hartford, where he spent years working. And we're going to talk to him about his experiences there. So I want to welcome, I'm going to turn over here to our guest, Gary. Welcome aboard. Nice to see you again.
It's great to be with you again, Jeff.
And you were, again, Schenectady, New York.
That's right.
And where did you, just to refresh my memory too, where did you go get your college?
Oh, I did my college at SUNY Albany. Used to be called Albany State, but it's SUNY Albany now.
Okay.
And then I did my postgraduate work and seminary at Boston University.
Okay, seminary. And what's the when you go to when you study at the seminary, BU?
Yes.
Wasn't that the same BU? Isn't that the same place where Martin Luther King studied?
That's right. He was about a generation ahead of me.
He was an ordained minister.
Yes.
And he got it in
systematic theology.
And so what was your main focus?
Yeah, my focus was church history, and particularly American and British church history. Though I did work in Roman Catholic studies and various other stories.
Well, what was your as you grew up? What was your family upbringing? Was Roman Catholic?
No, I was brought up Methodist, and I'm ordained Methodist.
And how did you? Why did you continue with that belief system that you were introduced to as a child? A lot of times a person will, as they grow up, they will get another religion, or they will drift away from whatever that religion they were. Why did you stay with it?
I think partly because I always harked back as a historian to the teachings of John Wesley, our founder, and I love Methodist hymns that were written by his brother Charles. But over the years, I've amended a great many things as well, so that for the last several years, my last church was UCC, and I stayed on there as choir master for years.
What's UCC stand for?
United Church of Christ, Congregational. My religious life down here has been tied to the Episcopal Church, so I've bounced around a good deal and find something useful in each tradition. In fact, my last church in Vermont, the one I just mentioned, I had in that congregation people whose backgrounds ranged all the way from Quaker and Unitarian right the way through to Roman Catholic. And they worshiped together, and we learned from each other's traditions, and it was wonderful. People didn't fight about doctrine. They were there to learn how to live better lives.
I want to get back to this later on.
Sure.
I want to kind of segue over to the main topic of today, but I definitely want to get back to the religious aspect of it and the doctrine and so on. But you, how did you get involved with the American School for the Deaf?
Well, it's kind of a long story, and I'll try not to make it unduly long. I suppose my first acquaintance with the whole business of deafness was when I realized that as a little kid that my grandfather was quite hard of hearing. And as he got older, my father, the same, my grandfather's brother. There was a lot of hard of hearing in the family. But I think I really got intrigued with it when I was still a little kid. We were visiting an aunt and uncle when the whole family was there, and they had the television on. TV was a new thing in those days. We didn't have one, but aunt and uncle did. And the family was listening to the Ed Sullivan Show while us kids were out in another room playing. And presently, one of the adults came in and said, "Come on, kids, you've got to see this." And Ed Sullivan had as his guest Helen Keller and her then companion, Polly Thompson. And I had heard about Miss Keller in school. I mean, she was a phenomenon. And she actually, Helen could speak. Not awfully clearly, and it was a kind of big, hollow sounding voice. But she actually spoke on the program.
I never knew that.
Yes.
Helen Keller was able to speak.
Yes. Not terribly clearly, but if you listened very carefully, you could understand what she was saying.
So when you were talking to her, what was the lady's name? Her teacher?
Polly Thompson
Polly.
at that time.
Now she would sign language.
Yes.
And then Helen would respond.
That's right.
Either with her voice or
with finger spelling.
And then Thompson would relay it to you.
Well, relate it over the television
To the viewers.
And I was so intrigued. And that kind of stayed in the back of my mind for many years. And then when I was working as a rare books cataloger at Dartmouth College, I was quite good at reading 19th century handwriting. You know, they say it's much more beautiful than it is nowadays. That's not necessarily true. It could be pretty scrawly. And one day, the manuscripts curator brought me a sheet of paper with handwriting on it, and he said, "I can't read it, and I can't read the signature. Can you decipher it?" And so I sat down with it, and little by little, I worked it out. And it was a page of manuscript, apparently of a report, and it was signed by the person who had written it. And I finally worked out that his signature was Samuel Gridley Howe. Now, you know his wife, Julia Ward Howe, who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Samuel Gridley Howe was the founding principal of the Perkins Institute for the Blind. And that's where Helen went for her education, along with her first teacher, Anne Sullivan Macy. And so I got intrigued, and they asked me if I would write an article based on this manuscript, which told the story of the first two deaf and blind individuals in America to be educated. And would I do some research and produce an article for them? Well, I did the research as much as I could, and one of the two students who were described was a young lady named Julia Brace. And it indicated that Miss Brace had first been trained at the American School for the Deaf here in, at that time, downtown Hartford. So I got interested in researching Julia Brace. And one thing led to another. I moved subsequently to the Connecticut Historical Society to be their head cataloger. And one day I was bemoaning the fact that I couldn't finish this article because I couldn't find out what had happened to Julia Brace, and I wanted to bring the story full circle. Well, the manuscripts librarian there said, "Oh, Mr. Waite, I think I remember seeing an obituary of Julia Brace." And that was on a Friday, and on Monday morning when I came into work, there was a scrapbook open on my desk with the obituary, so I knew how the story came out. And that became more interesting, and I finished the article, and it was published in the Dartmouth Library Bulletin. And I had to produce some library exhibits, so maybe the next year or two, it came around my turn to do an exhibit, and it was during Deaf Heritage Week. And so I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to do an exhibit on deaf and deafblind education? And in fact, there was enough material for me to do that. And I contacted this is the sign for telephone. I contacted the head of the American School for the Deaf, Winfield McCord, who was a good friend and fellow parishioner of mine. And he opened the archives for me and provided a little exhibit material. And so I did the exhibit, and from then, one thing led to another. I started cooperating with the school. If they got historic materials as gifts, I would do the appraisals for them. And I started attending their class days and graduations. And at that point, the school realized it was sitting on a treasure trove of material that had never been organized. And the alums were beginning to be anxious about its fate. So the school administration decided that they needed to do a survey of what was there and what needed to be done with it. So they invited me to come and do that, which I did. And that led to an offer of a position as the school's first archivist. And from then on, as they say, it's history. I loved it there. I loved the work. And I had a virgin collection to deal with. So I ended up setting up both the archives and the museum.
How many years did you do that, from when to when? What year did you get on board?
1999, and I stayed there for 12 years. In fact, I used to joke I'm in the 10th year of a 3-year appointment. Because the original appointment was for 3 years to organize the archives. And I was having such a good time, and they seemed to be happy with what I was doing, that I was renewed year after year, and ended up organizing the first museum as well, and stayed until I was 72, when I began to feel I was maybe not, had not the energy. I had Biden syndrome. I would love to have stayed, but it reached the point where I felt it was time to say goodbye before they asked me to say goodbye. But I've kept up my contact with them ever since and gone back to do some grant proposals and things like that.
You went on board in 1999.
Yes.
And like, as you said, you were heaped upon you with all this records and paperwork, all kinds of documents.
Oh, it was a real treasure trove. They had saved a lot of
How
stuff.
long ago? When did the American School for the Deaf, when did they begin to operate? How far back did all of your research go?
Okay, that's where we start the school story, actually. The school was opened in 1817. It's the oldest continuously operating deaf school in the country and the mother school of most other deaf schools. But the story actually starts in 1805 when a little girl named Alice Cogswell, the daughter of one of Hartford's premier physician surgeons, contracted something called spotted fever in those days. Probably would be spinal meningitis in our terms. And while most people recovered from the disease, if they didn't die from it, in young people it tended to leave residual effects. And little Alice Cogswell was rendered deaf. And naturally, her parents, being loving parents, wanted to do the best they could for her. And they had two other daughters. And the two daughters were enrolled in a school kept by Lydia Sigourney, whose name may be familiar to your viewers, because we have Sigourney Street here in Hartford named after her. She became a very famous poet. But at that time, she had not yet married. She was Lydia Huntley. And she started a select school for girls, and the two Cogswell girls attended. Well, little Alice wanted to go to school with her two big sisters. And Mrs. Sigourney, being very kind-hearted, agreed that she could come. And Miss Huntley didn't simply become a glorified babysitter for the girl while she was in the school. She actually set about to try to teach Alice. And she succeeded remarkably well. We have manuscripts that were produced by Alice while she was, I think she was about 12 when she was in Miss Huntley's school, and they are quite creditable. At first, very crude, of course, but little by little, Miss Huntley refined the girls' command of English, and they evolved a kind of homemade sign language to communicate. And that indicated to Dr. Cogswell, the girl's father, that she was intelligent. We use the word dumb nowadays to mean stupid, but originally it meant not speaking. But the two overlapped even back then. And Dr. Cogswell and his wife realized that little Alice was really quite bright. And so they began to explore what was being done to educate deaf individuals. Of course, there were no schools here in the United States. One had been tried in Virginia, but it had failed. So Dr. Cogswell organized a group of his well-to-do friends, including Daniel Wadsworth, the founder of the Wadsworth Athenaeum, and Nathan Strong, who was the then pastor of First Church on Main Street, and a number of wealthy individuals. And they organized a fund to send someone to Europe to find out what was being done for deaf education there and see if a school could be started in this country. And a young theological student named Thomas Gallaudet agreed to go. And he did, in fact, go. He went to England first, but was not well received there. But then he met the head of the deaf school in Paris, the Abbé Sicard, French clergyman, and Sicard's two star pupils who were doing demonstrations in England. And they invited Gallaudet to come across to Paris and study in their school if he didn't succeed in England. Well, he didn't, and presently, and there are a lot of interesting connections here that I won't clutter the story with. Gallaudet went to Paris, studied in the French school, learned sign language, and persuaded one of Sicard's star students and assistants, a man named Léon Clair, to come back to America and partner in founding the school. By then it was 1817, and in April of that year, Gallaudet and Léon Clair opened a school in rented quarters in the City Hotel on Main Street, just across from where the Athenaeum is now. I think Bushnell Towers is on that site. There is a plaque there that shows it. We had 9 students who ranged in age from 10, very bright young lad from Massachusetts, to a 15-year-old traveling portrait painter, the oldest student we have ever had. And little by little, the school grew from there.
So Gary, from 1805 to 1817, now we go to 1999. We're talking about close to 200 years.
We've already celebrated our 200th anniversary.
200 years. By the time it got to you, though, to 1999, there was close to 200 years of stuff.
Yes, there was.
And it was saved and disorganized.
A couple of retired teachers, David Halberg and Francis Asquar, made some attempts to organize some of the material, but they were getting on in age, and the task was really, really overwhelming in many ways because things were scattered all over campus, and much of it, as you say, was unorganized. So that was my challenge.
So just briefly, how did you go about, without getting too into detail, how did you go about to sorting things out and putting things in some sort of chronological order, and where people could, you would have present some sort of a resource where people would come in and research the various years as they pass by. How did you go about doing that?
Well, the first thing was probably to organize the materials by general topics. Gather all the books together in one place, gather the manuscripts, gather the pictures in another, and the artifacts in another, and then work on each one individually. The books and manuscripts needed a lot of care in terms of restoration. The manuscripts needed to be put in archival folders so that they wouldn't deteriorate further. And I organized both the books and the manuscripts chronologically.
Were you given a staff to work with? Were there people who were able to work with you and who had skills in certain methods of, I'm sure that there's somewhere out there's some literature, some people that are skilled at developing, building archives?
Oh, there are a lot. Unfortunately, there were none available in Hartford. I did the whole thing myself.
No kidding. Wow.
Well, that's why they kept keeping me on for years and years, because you don't do all that overnight. Like Rome, it isn't built in a day. And then meanwhile, it involved organizing and building up a museum display as well. So it took a great deal of time, and meanwhile, the collection kept growing. I would make contact with alums who were sitting on caches of material, and they were keeping it because nobody was doing anything with the museum collection. So when the word began to get out that there was somebody there and it was being organized and made available to scholars and deaf heritage enthusiasts, those collections started coming in too.
If the viewers out there wanted to avail themselves of this material, is there the American School that exists now on North Main Street in West Hartford? Is that where your material? Is that where the archives are?
Yes.
So what would they do? They would go there, and they would. Is there a certain room or space where they could?
Yes. Originally, we had two rather cramped rooms in the old Gallaudet building that was demolished in order to build the new school building several years ago. When it became clear that the old Gallaudet building had deteriorated beyond the point of restoration, it was decided to replace it with a new building. And at the same time, the then director, Edward Peltier, and his wife decided not to live in the residence that was provided for them on campus, which was a sensible decision. They got a housing allowance and were able to build equity in a home of their own. So the building that had been the director's residence became available. And after a good deal of negotiation, it was given to the museum and archives for its location. So the museum at this point has its own location, and people are welcome to go and use the collections. I am not sure just what the arrangement is now. Up until recently, we had a very fine manager who replaced me after I retired, Gene Linderman. But Gene has been involved less and less because of personal issues. And a retired teacher, Bradford Mosley, is looking after the museum and archives now, but I don't know just what his schedule is. But if people call the museum or call the school, they can make an appointment, and Brad or Gene would be there to guide them to the materials they're looking for.
We're going to continue this conversation because there's some stuff we haven't talked about yet, and Gary is he's, in my opinion, he's too rare of a person with his background and his knowledge and his experiences. I think we need to keep on talking to him. So we'll say goodbye for now. Gary, thank you very much.
Thank you,
for your
Jeff.
time. And you viewers out there, we will see you next time, and more likely than not with Gary. So stay with us because there's some fascinating stuff to come your way. Thank you.